Hello again, fellow travelers. So, it is I, Jim, with my postgraduate degree in social responsibility and sustainability, back to provide wisdom, guidance, advice, and understanding in in making a brighter tomorrow for ourselves and our posterity. Today, going to talk about the ethics of democratic socialism. This is not to be confused with certain political parties that actually exist. Just based, some of the people who may affiliate, but their calls for more socialist extremism and the ethics involved. So, some of the more left-leaning political activists, whether they be politicians or just activists on the street, keep pushing and pressuring and offering these ideas of things like, basic universal income to ensure that everybody has a minimum standard of living, housing, food, because, who wants children to go hungry? These are some ideas that they put forward as needing to be politicized and having the government enforce to give people things like a universal basic income or a minimum living wage to ensure that they have a reasonable amount of resources. Providing food, housing, and medical and dental insurance. Now, on the surface, let's look at these. Who wants to see starving children? Is that really something that has to be even discussed? Is that a question? No one wants to see children go hungry. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Of course. Obviously. All human lives matter. All lives matter. Oh, well, if you say all lives matter, you're minimizing. Whoa. Scratch that. Once again, we're going with a false narrative. But, it is offensive that sometimes people have to point out that people of color are people too. But that's where they get controversial. Housing. Oh, people shouldn't be homeless. It's so hard for homeless people living on the street. This is true. Who wants to see homeless people living on the street? That's not even a question. Basic health care. Oh, really? Who wants to see a child with diabetes dying on the street corner? Once again, not really a question. Okay, what about abortion? A woman's right. Really? What about the child's right? False narrative. Yeah, it's a woman's body, but hey, she's going to get a medical procedure or throw herself down the stairs. If she really wants to get rid of it, she's going to. So, why shouldn't she have health care? Well, these look like very basic promises. Nobody wants to see children going hungry. Nobody wants to see people living on the street. Nobody wants to see a young woman thrown out of her house for getting pregnant. People don't want to see these things, and they certainly don't want to see a woman throw herself down the stairs to try to get rid of something. So how does one argue with this? Well, the simple fact is, it's not an argument. These are all false promises. Basic ethics are that people are entitled to what they produce or what they obtain through fair trade. Fair trade meaning that I trade you something equitable for said item. $2,000 for a gallon of water during a drought is not a fair trade. Yeah, that may be some people's idea of, well, that's capitalism. No, that's abuse. That's abuse of opportunity. That's the same thing as saying, well, if you give me $200, I won't pull a trigger that puts a bullet through your head. That's robbery. That's abuse of interpersonal relationships. The only thing people are entitled to is what they produce, what they fairly trade for, or things that secondarily come through one of those two things. So let's look at this. Food. Humans have to have food to survive. Disney gave us this wonderful song in their cartoon movie Aladdin. Gotta eat to live, gotta steal to eat. Gotta steal. So you're violating the basic ethic of fair trade. Oh, well, he was an impoverished street rat. Really not an excuse. I mean, using that same excuse, I don't own a Tesla. If I steal a Tesla, nobody's going to say, well, you needed an electric car. They're going to say that it's Grand Theft Auto. Now, if you grow food, say you have a garden and you produce food, you are entitled to that food you produce. However, no one is entitled to someone else's effort. One cannot walk up to a person with a garden and say, I'm taking your food that you produced because I'm hungry. That is a violation of basic ethics. Well, what about housing? Housing exists. True, housing exists. Someone has to purchase the land. Someone has to build the house. And someone has to provide the utilities. No one is entitled to other people's effort. You can only obtain those through fair trade. If you have the means of fair trade, say your parents gave you $1 million, then you can purchase it. But if no one gave you anything, you have to get a job. You have to somehow produce the means of trade. Just saying that a person requires it to be for survival does not make it a right. You need air, but breathing is not a right. If it were a right, then take someone to the moon and argue with the universe that there's no atmosphere for them to breathe. It's not really how it works. Healthcare, health or dental care. This applies the same way. People need healthcare to survive. Well, let's see, 1,000 years ago, they didn't really have doctors. You had a fever, you went to somebody like a witch doctor who might slap you with some sage, cut you to let some blood out because, well, they're too hot, so we need to let some blood out so they'll cool down. Yeah. we can pretty much say that if you tried doing that today, everyone would laugh at you. Okay? But even with that witch doctor version versus a medical doctor, your health care is reliant on the efforts of someone else. Once again, no one has a right to the work of someone else. If I walk up to someone and say, you have to work for me because it's my right to make you work, that would be tantamount to bringing the return of slavery. That's unacceptable. It was made illegal for a reason. Granted, in the last 200 years that versus the last 200,000 years, modern world, we don't like the idea of slavery. Sadly, governments tolerate it to a degree, such as certain countries that affiliate with corporations in their borders to utilize people who are in prison as a form of slave labor. And other countries around the world tolerate it, and we make up excuses like, well, they're a sovereign country. That's the same argument that was used in the United States in 1938 through 1945, even though at a point our country engaged in World War II, there were still activists protesting in Washington that Germany, Nazi Germany, was a sovereign nation with a right to make its rules for its own borders. Yeah, you can't make that argument that countries have a right to do what they want to as a justification to ignore human rights violations. Well, I mean, you can. It happens. We're doing it all the time. Americans ignored the fact that the Saddam Hussein regime of Iraq gassed Kurds, straight up dropped sarin gas on them, that they used children as target practice. We blatantly ignored those things, basic human rights violations, stating that Iraq was a sovereign nation. Those are examples of human rights violations. In forcing a doctor to provide medical care is a violation of that doctor's basic human rights. No one has a right to force them to work. No one has a right to force the employees at a factory to do work. That's why they get paid. Now, is there an issue with some employers paying the minimum that they have to in order to obey the law? Yes, there are plenty of employers who will only pay minimum wage. And the reason that they get away with it is not because it's the law of the land. They get away with it because there are employees who are willing to work for minimum wage. And our current, more left-leaning individuals in our country say that, well, those people don't have the ability to look anywhere else. Yes, they do. You can be a 30-year-old high school dropout, and you can still decide you are not willing to work for minimum wage just because you don't have a high school diploma. It is possible. You may have to start your own business, but, that's life. Mark Zuckerberg is a college dropout, and yet he created, produced, and owns Facebook. He's a college dropout using that theory that, he had a high school diploma and that's it. Why is he not getting paid minimum wage? Because he took the time, effort, and energy to do something about it. Anyone can do it. Using the excuse that the government mandates minimum wage does not negate the fact that the people who are doing the work have a right to negotiate for a better production for themselves. Doesn't mean they'll succeed, but they have a right to say they want to get paid more. The employer has a right to say, well, this is what I'm going to pay. Agree with it, or I can close the factory. I don't care. They can do that. People have a right to walk into an emergency room. They do not have a right to say, you have to serve me. People do not have a right to walk into a restaurant and say, you will feed me. They may have a right to walk in, and the owner has a right to say, you can leave. Now, there are cases where that is not exactly accurate, but that's because of the nuance of humanity. In America, a company cannot say, no black people allowed, no Irish allowed. Of course, if they say no Irish allowed, they're probably going to get away with that today, but, it'd still result in a lawsuit that's probably still going to at least get heard in court. But these all go into these beautiful lies that we are told by Democrat Socialist ideology, that people should have a right to get paid a living wage. People should have a right to eat and should have a right to have a place to live in safety. Yeah, these are beautiful ideas that cannot be enforced because there are people, because quite simply, people will abuse it. Whether that is people who will take everything and give nothing back, or people who will say, I'm not going to give any more than I have to. It goes both ways. There are people who will abuse it. People who just want to say, hey, let's all help out a little. Okay, you want to help out a little, but you have no right to tell me to help out. With that in mind, there's a business model idea right there. We have a stock market in America, and people make a lot of money on it. Corporations make a lot of money. Andrew Carnegie, who was a Scottish immigrant to the U.S., had nothing when he arrived. He produced a lot of money over time. He had this lofty ideal that he put forward in a book that perhaps all of these corporate magnates with their huge amounts of money could put a portion of their money together to produce systems that would allow young people to get mentorship and become the next innovators. Nice idea. Nobody wanted to put any money into it because why should they give? Well, using that idea, wouldn't it be possible for someone to start an investment fund that makes money on the stock market specifically for funding an organization that provides mentorship, education, and opportunity? If we leave it to the government, then all we're going to wind up with is another system and bureaucracy. But this is an idea that someone could put forward. Y'all have a great week and hope for a brighter tomorrow.